much. So today I want to talk to you about some of the advanced metadata management that we've been doing at Piksel and how it could potentially apply to you. So the challenge that we face really metadata today is that you all probably have been spending a lot of money on either directly or indirectly acquiring a stockpile of content rights, and then you've also then been building up multiscreen services to exploit that content on. So the consumer is getting much more content, and the paradox really is that the more content they get, the harder it is for them to find what they want. What we think the solution here is actually improving metadata, because the metadata itself drives all of the content discovery, be it search, be it recommendations. The whole UI is underpinned by the quality of the metadata. So getting the metadata right across the services is paramount. In terms of the impact here, 73%, so over 70% really of consumers are frequently either overwhelmed with content or they're frustrated by the amount there. A third of people frequently can't find anything to watch, and that sort of 7% even goes as far as switching off. So there's a big problem here, but if we can solve it, then sort of 2/3 of people said that if they could find the right content, they would actually either upgrade their subscription, they would move to a new provider. So there's a big potential opportunity here if we can solve it. One of the issues really comes from the separate workflows that people have had. So typically running a metadata workflow for broadcast, the kind of data that fills your EPGs, and another workflow for your digital or sort of OTT business. Historically, this wasn't such a big problem because they were quite separate. But increasingly, as they're coming together, as you're really viewing your single screen, your linear content, your on-demand content are now coming together. They're becoming seamless. The disparity between them is causing real problems for consumers. So I've picked a few examples out. Hopefully, there were some European examples, but I've not chosen them to spare blushes. But this is just some screenshots. This is an EPG, and here, you can see there's a show here. We can see the show name, and we can see the episode title. If we look again at this on sort of the on-demand service, now we see episode numbers and episode titles. So again, it's different again. If we look again at another part, we see now we're seeing episode number, we're seeing name, more episode information. It's just massively inconsistent. And then finally, the same show again. Now we just get episode numbers. A real challenge. And here, even, we've got a show here, and now we're naming it by broadcast date. So for the consumer, this is difficult. And these are very prosaic examples. The complexity goes much deeper when we start looking at the kind of entity relationships between shows, episodes, seasons, series. But if we can actually unify all the metadata together, then we can create a much more consistent service for the consumer, but also we can help ourselves in the process. So a unified workflow is the obvious thing to do in terms of unifying your metadata workflow for your linear and your on-demand content. And then on the very edge of your systems, then do your adaptation according to the device. So if you're a linear broadcaster, linear broadcast adaptation here. The same for your OTT services. Now, okay, it's all very simplified. It's all very easy to say. If you're a broadcaster, actually, much of this is under your control. You own your content. You have control of your destiny. So these things should be achievable, but it doesn't quite stop there. So it's not quite as easy as that. The problem really is that typically what you're creating with your metadata workflow are a whole bunch of silos. So I've represented these silos in a linear line here. If you were to do a process map of your organization, you'll probably see that actually it's a big complex web, a web of data flows. But at various points in those data flows, you have metadata silos. the problem here is that you're doing work on each of those processes. So each process, you're generating some metadata, and then you're passing that metadata on to the next part of the workflow. But you're not passing all of it, you're only passing a little bit. Each of your interchange points only passes a small amount of metadata. So you've done a lot of work, you spend a lot of money, a lot of people effort, and each time you're only passing a small amount. So you get to the end of the chain, and you've effectively lost a lot of value of metadata because you're only ever using a small amount. So as you move down the workflow, you're doing work that cannot be exploited. So just to give you some examples there, a production company would create a show, and they would have a script. That effectively is a piece of data. Somewhere down the line here, as a broadcaster or as an aggregator, you are paying somebody to create subtitles. You're effectively duplicating that information. So down the value chain here, that information existed. It got thrown away, probably many, many stages back, but you need to recreate it. There's a number of stages where data is created and thrown away. A rights department has a lot of information, and then they move a little bit to scheduling, but they don't move all of it. The other problem with the approach really is the latency that's introduced. So latency and coherency of your metadata. So much of these processes work on big bulk ingests and batch processing, which means delays. So as we move through this process, there's delays. Anyone who has these systems will know that it's really not uncommon for processing delays really to take many hours to get through. So EPG updates and things can take hours. I mean, 4 hours is not uncommon. 6 hours, 8 hours. I mean, we've seen use cases of some people taking 12 hours to get stuff through. And what that means really is that it means an impact on your consumer. If you can't get information through to your customer, if they can't view things at the other end because the EPG hasn't updated, because the search results are not there, they cannot find your content. Even worse, we talked about potentially a web. You could be building up race conditions here where metadata and the data flows through your systems effectively are incoherent. And so worst case is that the consumer thinks content's there, but actually other systems, entitlement systems, don't. So how do we solve this problem? What's our suggestion, really? We suggest really moving to a single cloud backbone where all of your processes in your workflow communicate to a single backbone and share their metadata in the cloud. And so rather than each process passing only a small amount of metadata and the rest of it being lost along the way, we build it up in the cloud so that all of the information then is there available to your workflow. All of the information is current to every process working on it. And the great advantage to this in terms of the future and moving forward is that you're no longer looking at single interchanges between your systems. You can quite happily adapt your workflow by simply plugging back into this cloud backbone. So your workflow no longer becomes sort of constrained by the linear processes. You can quite easily adapt. You can add new things in as new systems are required, and they all have access to that content. Clearly, the other thing is, because all of the metadata is there, each process can consume what it needs, but as a new process comes along, if it needs other metadata, it can take that. It's all there. We haven't got this issue of duplication and recreating metadata along the way. The cloud obviously gives us a great advantage as well in terms of the scalability of the solution. So metadata is typically, I mentioned kind of this batch processing of metadata. Anyone who's seen these, huge files that come in, they're colossal files and they need processing. They typically then get turned into another load of colossal files that need processing again. You can use the cloud very effectively to scale up to process those things very quickly. So we can do stream processing on large files, which again reduces our latency, gets content, gets visibility through to customers very quickly. But it's not always that easy. So if you're a broadcaster, I mentioned, not so bad. If you're an aggregator of content, if you're running a TV platform. You've got a number of content providers delivering you metadata. There's no necessary consistency between it. They're not using the same IDs, they're not using the same naming conventions. You're going to get duplication, you're going to get inconsistency, all those problems I showed you before on the screenshots. So how do we solve those things? Well, I mean, we rely on machine learning, and we think this is a very effective way of solving the problem. So we're using machine learning to, again, in the cloud, to match shows, movies, episodes, and we're getting about 95% accuracy on that. And what we can do then is dedupe. So in your metadata now, you have single records. That means your operational people can manage it as single entities. You're no longer looking at multiple kind of efforts. So suddenly your operational workflow becomes much more efficient. Again, the consumer point of view, things become more consistent on their end. The other thing we can do is by creating a canonical model with a unique ID, matching it against external providers, we can pull in external providers as well. So we can go out to, you can cross-reference to the IMDb's of this world, to IDAs, the Grace Notes and Rovies, and actually pull in data. So when you're missing data, you can go out and find it, and you can do that because you have this matching against a canonical data set. And obviously, and finally, once you've moved to the cloud, once you've moved to machine learning, once you've started to move more and more of your metadata and your assets into the cloud, it's a fairly simple step then to start using machine learning to do more deeper analysis, actually creating metadata in the first place from analysis of the assets themselves. So we can then start to derive plot information, themes, moods, identification of actors, topics, settings and places to actually enrich the metadata and store it all in the same place. So then this becomes available. So I think I'm probably at time. So I'll leave that summary on there. In the interest of timekeeping, if there's any Q&A afterwards, then perhaps please come see me. We're upstairs, Piksel upstairs in the coffee lounge. Thank you.
Right.